I know that we have just a couple minutes before we're supposed to start, but I'll go ahead and get started, and then that way, hopefully, we'll be done a few minutes extra, and y'all can have time to go to your next session, okay? So everybody should have got a packet off the table over here, and what you will have when you are finished is your ring, and it'll look like this with all of these behavior strategies on it. Okay, so when you get it cut out and hole punched, put it on your ring, and then you will have a resource library there. Okay, so I'm Nina Ingram, and I work with Kentucky ABRI, and Kentucky ABRI is just, we come out as a free service to districts and be able to help with professional development and work on systems and, different things in school districts. So it's just, I'm like an extra resource, resource for you all as well as your district. So I'm going to talk about behavior strategies for everyday wins. And we will talk about your cards in just a little bit too. Here's my contact information. If anybody has any questions, feel free to reach out to me. The handouts folder will have this presentation along with the link for the cards that you have in front of you if you would like to take those back and share those. So most of you all have already done this, but you got your cards, cut them out, put them on your ring, and then we'll talk about them before we're finished with this session. Okay, so let's talk about a little bit about why behavior strategies matter. We got to think about behavior in the school, behavior that you all are working with these students, individually. Why does it matter? Why does it impact everything? So let's just have a little share out real quick and tell me some of the behaviors that you all see in your schools that you feel like is a problem. Anybody want to share? Kicking, hitting, biting, aggression, throwing things, yes. What else have you all seen? Running out of the class, running away. What did you say? Yelling and, foul language. What did you say a minute ago?
Destruction of property.
Well, I can't even say it. Destruction of property. Anything else that you all are seeing? I've been in the classroom for the last 22 years, so I totally have seen it all too. I saw anywhere from the tantrums in the floor, to the running out of the building and, finding them a quarter mile down the road because it's just you, and I'm sure that you all have seen that if you've been in it any long at all, you've seen a lot of these behaviors. What about the calling out in class when they should be quiet? Or not raising their hand and they're calling out instead. Yes. Yeah. So let's talk about why, these behavior strategies and what the impact they're going to have. The impact is clear. Positive behavior management directly linked to academic. Can you see those students who have high behavior issues are a lot of times lower in academics? What do you think the reason behind that might be? They're not getting learning time because of their disruptions, the teachers having to take time, the assistants having to take time, and focus on that student. So they're not getting the academics. Absolutely. What else? What else would be a reason why they're not getting their academics?
They don't want to learn.
I've
had one tell me, I don't want to learn this stuff.
Yeah, and the consequences, and that does come directly back to their behavior a lot of times too. Where they're not motivated. So that's a behavior.
One little boy, I said, "What are you going to do when you grow up? Be just like my dad, ain't going to do nothing, sit on the couch."
Yeah, and I've heard that. I've heard that too. I had a student one time, and I said, "What?" We was talking about what he was going to do. He said, "Well, Grandma will pay for everything. She does now."
This boy's grandma cuts the grass while Dad sits on the couch.
So I think they're home life too. It does. Absolutely. Absolutely. And we don't have any idea what these kids are going through at home. Absolutely no idea what they're truly going through at home, and the trauma that they're sustaining when they're at home. Most kids don't even have any consistency. There's no consistency at home. Some of them don't even know where they're going to get off the bus at that day. And that's an issue. That would definitely give me anxiety if I didn't know where I was going at the end of the day. And these are the kids that have these behaviors a lot of times. So you've got to keep those things in mind and try to figure out, as the adults, what can you do to try to help that student work through those issues, along with them getting their academics as well. Okay. So, the impacts: positive behaviors directly linked to academics. It reduces classroom disruptions by up to 80%. If the behavior is under control and you've got good classroom management skills going on, and those classrooms are moving smoothly, they can get a whole lot more done with those students. You build trust and create classroom safety. You increase instructional time by minimizing behavior interventions. You all, it's going to empower you all to effectively support that. When there's good classroom management going on and good things going on in that class, it's going to enable you all to come in and be able to help with those students and with those classes. So why are we focusing on behavior? We've got the productive learning environment, effective behavior management, and it's crucial. It's crucial for everybody that's working with these students. We want to hinder that disruptive behavior. And it may be as simple as walking over and literally, tapping them on the shoulder. It doesn't have to be, anything more than that. It can just simply be walking by and just, and then that immediately gets that student's attention. And you all in those classrooms are able to do that as well, because you can walk around and you can see, and it may not be necessarily a student you're particularly working with, but you can walk over too and you can just tap them on the shoulder, tap your finger on the table, something simple to gain their attention back to whatever needs to be happening. So you've got a higher academic achievement. Positive behavior strategies lead to increased student engagement. You've got reduced burnout. Everybody's seen burnout going on, right? When you have a lot of disruptions and a lot of behaviors going on in the school, in the classrooms, and this and that, it's easy to get burnout. It's easy to be like, I'm done, I can't do this, so the more positive you can be, the better it's going to be for everybody, including yourselves. If you've got a positive classroom culture, implementing those positive strategies, it builds that foundation. You've got a valuable investment. Focusing on that behavior pays for academics, classroom climate, professional well-being. We all want to feel better, right? We all want to, walk in and be like, okay, this is going to be a great day. Everything's going to be positive. No negatives today. Everything's going to be smooth, and it's going to make us feel better. And sometimes that is hard, to walk in and always have a smile on your face and, and being positive. I understand that, but do your best to make sure that you are portraying that positivity coming from you as well. Your collaborative partnerships, roles of teachers and paraprofessionals, collaborate with whoever you're working with in that building. You and them work together, because the biggest reason you are at the reason you're at that school is to be able to help those students. I realize it's a job, however, you need to be there to support those students. So, collaborate with whoever you're working with. Offer crucial behavior support. Be there. If whoever you're working with and you're partnering with, work with them and partner and make sure that you all are working consistently together. Consistent implementation, early intervention. You have a unified approach. Ensure students receive clear, consistent messages. I'm sure that you all have all heard about PBIS and have those expectations in your schools. Make sure those are clear to you and the students. You know, the teachers in the schools have these set expectations, especially for the whole school, plus, you know, the areas and kind of like their rules, but, you know, we're calling them the expectations. You know, make sure that you all are consistent with them and that you all are, you know, doing whatever those expectations are. For example, I had a student, or I had students, and I was working. So I came out of the special ed classroom. So, you know, that's where I have worked, and I taught for the last 22 years in special ed. Well, I was walking my kids to class one day, and one of the expectations in the school that I worked in was that they walked on the black tile on the right side of the hallway. That way, you know, they could go both directions. So kind of like this red line here in the floor, you know, my students were walking on the red line, but I was over here in the middle of the hallway. I was in the middle of the hall because I'm the adult. You know, I was walking beside of them. I was walking beside of them, but they called me out on it. And they said, Miss Ingram, yeah, and they will too, will they not? So they called me out on it. They said, Miss Ingram said, well, we're walking on the black tile. Why aren't you? And I'm like, well, that's a good question. Why is it important for me to walk on the black tile? You know, and they said, well, you need to do the, you know, follow the expectations too. And so I had to take a step over and I had to walk on the black tile because I had to model that for them. And I mean, I'm glad they called me out on it because I needed called out on it, you know, so. And then, like I said, they will call you out if you're not doing it. So you do the expectations that, you know, whatever you're expecting them to do, you all do the same thing. Okay? That was just an example. I'm sure you all have seen all kinds of, you know, different things like that too. Um, you know, uh, yeah, I think I went over most of them. All right, go on. Understanding student behavior. We kind of talked about this a minute ago. You know, there's a lot of unmet needs. You know, the students, you know, their behaviors are a form of communication. When they're having behaviors going on, you know, they could just be hungry. You know, there could have been something bad, trauma happened at home, and, you know, mommy's upset, and therefore they're upset. So they're bringing that behavior to school with them. So, you know, you all as the adults have to be conscious of what that, you know, that behavior, where's it stemming from? You know, what's the reason behind, you know, these behaviors that are going on? And let's try to see how, you know, what kind of coping skills we might need with that child. You know, what's the reason behind that? You know, if they are, there's 4 functions of behavior. There's escape, there is sensory needs, there is gaining attention, and there is one more. Oh, tangible items. So, you know, there's a lot of different reasons that they could. If you see these students, one of y'all called out a while ago about running out of the school, running out of the classroom. You know, if they're trying to escape, what is their reason for wanting to escape? And how can we adjust that to help them? You know, if it maybe it's the worksheet is too hard that they're doing. Well, you know, talk through and work through and have them just do a little bit at a time. You know, break it up into pieces, you know, so that they feel like they're in control, because that's what they want. They want to be in control of the situation. So, you know, break it into pieces and only have them do a few problems at a time until they complete the whole thing. You know, whatever that is, if that's what they're escaping, you know, if they're escaping for other reasons, you know, try to find out what that is, you know, and address those needs before trying to, I say, force them to do the work. You know, try to figure out what it is, you know, and see how that you all as adults can help with that. Some underlying factors. We done talked about the trauma, you know, the adverse childhood experiences. You know, where I said the kids may come in hungry. And they may come in, and some of these kids, and you all know this as well as I do, but some of these kids only get fed when they're at school. And it's very sad. Thankfully, we don't have to, but we know that there are some kids that walk in and they're just hungry. And me, if I don't get my coffee and a little something to eat in the morning, I'm pretty grumpy too. I mean, I can be that way, especially my coffee. It's just one of those things I feel like I need. Do I really need it? Probably not, but you know, but these kids, I mean, they're walking in and they could just be hungry. So if you can find that might be the behavior and that might be the reason behind it, within your control, within what you are allowed to do, see what you can do to help with that. And there's many other things too. That's just an example. Some students have learning differences or learning difficulties. A lot of times the escape function is related to them not being able to complete the assignment or do the work because they are struggling academically. So they need that. They might need that extra support. That would be where breaking it down or even using different models or methods to solve the problems or whatever the assignment is. Make it to where that they can understand what's going on. And there's a lot of people in your school, and in your district that can help with that as well. There's environmental stressors, sensory challenges. A lot of students now have the necklace with the chewy tube or the trying to think there's something else called the fidgets, right? Even like a stress ball or something. If they're chewing on stuff, those little chew tubes are good to kind of help them because that's a sensory issue for them. If I am sitting and I'm just listening, but my foot, I see several of y'all got the foot going. My foot's wiggling, my knee's going up. That's part of my sensory coping to be able to sit and to listen and to do whatever. A lot of times in church, I'll be wiggling my foot and my husband will touch my legs. Like, you're getting too, you're wiggling too much, So, but those are sensory things. But me, since I know that that's my sensory thing, I'm going to sit and do that with my foot, but I know to do it quietly. A student may have their pencil and they're tapping the table, and they're very loudly tapping the table, because they're wanting some sort of sensory, there's some sort of sensory thing there. Well, that might be when you walk over and say, okay, how about we try a fidget? Or we try a stress ball, if that's going to be, or what's something else, Or they may be tapping loudly on the floor. They make those bands that you can put on the chairs where their feet go up and down. Those are great. Love those. So, there's all kinds of different things that you can do for sensory challenges. All right, what shapes behavior? You've got developmental stages. The brain development. Students' brain development is not the same. Everybody's brain development does not happen the same. You have some that, it just develops a little bit slower. My preschool, kindergarten, first grade people, you all know about the developmental delay. That's usually where that shows up in those areas. Home environment, trauma, ADHD. Everybody seen ADHD students? Yep. Okay. So, there's something that's, it's shaping that child and that child's behavior. Learning differences. Not all learning differences are diagnosed. There are some that's, that either falls through the cracks or just doesn't get diagnosed, or, there's reasons behind that, but there could be differences there that are causing, these behaviors. Consistent presence, influence behavior, you all are going to provide that. You all are going to provide that individualized attention and positive reinforcement. Practical support, observe and document. Pay close attention to what is going on with these students. Document the specific observations, not just the interpretations. Whatever you see, make sure that you're kind of taking notes on that, or even just making a mental note so that you're looking for what interests that child. And whatever teacher you might be working with, or at whatever level you're at, make sure that your teachers are aware of that. Because as a special education teacher, I wasn't always aware of what little Johnny was doing, especially since I didn't see little Johnny but a short amount of time in the day. So even if you're working in the cafeteria, or whatever, if you see something going on, let that person that directly works with that child know what you see, and then that's going to help them better be able to figure out what's going on. Even the good stuff. If you've got a little boy and he's playing baseball, and you've been to his game or anything like that, let the teacher know so that they can have that positive interaction and have that, and make that difference for that child. That goes back to the building positive relationships. Build those relationships, reinforce the strategies, communicate. Positive classroom environment. It's best to do, if you can, and I know you all probably already with the PBIS have the expectations established in your schools. If students can help with some of that stuff, let them help, because they're going to have buy-in, and they're going to be like, oh yeah, okay, I was part of that, and it's going to mean more to them. Visual reminders. Positive language, just like it says here, walking feet. Instead of me saying, don't, or no running, I would stop and I would say walking feet. Try not to use the word no. Don't use the word don't. I just said it. Don't use the word don't. But don't use those things. Make it a positive. Say it in a positive way. They're going to remember it better, and it's not going to be like, well, I said to do this, or don't do this. It's going to be a positive. It's not going to be that negative interaction, and they're going to respond better to that. So, support, and modeling, just like I talked about, the walk-in, you've got to reinforce those. Setting expectations and routines, clear communication. Share the expectations before every activity. And it may be that you walk over to little Susie and you're like, now we're fixing to go to the hallway, and these are the expectations for the hallway, just as a reminder. And it doesn't have to be for the whole class to hear. It can be between me and little Susie, something like that. So you all keep that in mind. That's something very easy to do, just to prepare. We know that little Susie's got issues in the hallway, so we're going to make sure that she knows, that hallway time is coming, and this is what we expect of her. Very simple. If you can use visuals along with your verbal, that's great. I know that doesn't always happen, but if you can, especially your autistic students, students who are the lower functioning students, they need that visual just to see. Check and make sure they understand. Just like little Susie, I need to check and make sure that Susie knows what those expectations are, and that she understands to walk on that black tile down the hallway. Well, first of all, do you know what black means? Do we know what color that color is? Make sure that, they know what that is when you're teaching those. Establish predictable routines. Teach, model, practice it. Practice it, practice it, practice it. Visual schedules if you can. Routines reduce anxiety and increase security. These kids come to school today, which we all did too when we came to school, but if it was unsafe, we didn't want to be there. These students are the same way. They want to come to school and know that they're safe and they're in a safe environment when they come. Let them know that it's safe there. Let them know that if there's something going on outside of school or inside of school, that they can communicate with you all. Just make sure that they support them however you can, and just make sure they're aware that you are there to help support them. Okay? But, it says reduce anxiety. Like I said, some of these kids don't know where they're going at the end of the day. Well, that gives me anxiety if I didn't know what I was going to be doing, at the end of the day, at the end of the school day, and where I was going. I need that predictability. Well, these kids, if they don't have that and they don't know where they're going at the end of the school day, reinforce how, you might be able to figure out where are they going, and kind of help them through that anxiety. Setting expectations and routines. You've got consistent reinforcement, always model, prompt, and do it throughout. These expectations, and with your PBIS expectations as well, you cannot just teach them at the beginning of the school year. You have to teach them throughout, all the way through the school year, especially after a long break. We had the big long winter this year and everybody was off for about 2 months, Well, when you came back from that would have been a great time to go back and say, okay, we've got all these expectations and let's reteach them. Because you all know as well as I do, when I go home for the summer sometimes, I'm like, I don't remember what happened. And these kids are the same way. I did hand motions with some of my alphabet when I taught kindergarten, and I would come back to school the next year and I'm like, okay, now what motion went with what? Even though I had taught it all year long, the year before and the year before that, for several, I forgot, so, your kids are the same way. So just remember that, be consistent and teach them often, remind them often, model often. Provide that one-on-one or small group support to help students understand and navigate. Facilitate those transitions. Assist in guiding students smoothly. Communicate student progress. Let your teachers or your administration or whoever, let them know how those students, how the progress is going for those students. Building relationships before redirection. So, you have students who need redirected, but they don't know me. If I were to walk in and I'd say, well, little Johnny, you're supposed to be on the black tile, he'd be like, well, who are you? Why are you telling me that? What do you have to do? You have to build that relationship with that student, with that class, and make sure that they understand, they want the rapport from you. So, think about that. Just like the 2-minute get to know you. That would be a way of doing that, having those conversations. Let them feel comfortable with you. Does that mean you have to only do it in the class that you're working in? No, right. So you could do it in the lunchroom, the hallway, while the kids are standing at the restroom waiting to go in or out, Celebrate their strengths. Recognize their character strengths, growth mindset. Not just compliance, get them, do the caught being good. Because a lot of your schools use the caught being good or some form of that, in the school I worked in, we did tiger tickets. So I kept tiger tickets in my pocket, and I would, when I saw the kids in the hallway doing what they were supposed to, or what in the classroom or wherever, I'd just slip a tiger ticket out of my pocket and hand it to them. So that was something tangible for them. And they got to trade that ticket in for a prize. So build rapport, actively engage, facilitate those small groups, be consistent, be a positive presence in the classroom. The power of relationships. When students feel connected, they are more engaged, cooperative, and willing to meet. When they feel connected, they want to be there. Build those connections. learn about their interests, engage with them, build trust through consistent one-on-one support, positive feedback, share the insights with your other staff in the building. I like this. The time invested in these connections greatly benefits classroom management and student engagement throughout the year. It makes a difference. Here's some proactive strategies to prevent escalation. If I'm standing by students, are they less likely or more likely to act up?
Should be less likely.
Less likely. And that's usually true. They're less likely. If I'm standing here or I'm making eye contact, they're not gonna act out as bad. Keep that proximity. You all can do that in the classrooms. Just be near a student. I mean, if you see, little Sally's kind of bouncing in her seat, you can see something's coming, just get a little close and just stand there, It doesn't have to be anything fancy, just, the proximity part of it. Your nonverbal cues. Here's an example. If you're in a classroom and between you and that student has an interaction, and you know that student, if that student puts his hand on his head, then you know that you're like, okay, I know that's my cue to address that student and see what's going on and see what the need is. Or it could be scratching your shoulder. Whatever that cue is that you have for that student, kind of make something up, build that relationship and make that part of it. And it may be like, okay, if they're rubbing their temple, does all the other students know what rubbing the temple means? No. But you and that student knows that when that student is rubbing their temple, they're needing something. So then that's your cue to go over and try to figure out, well, is it a work problem? Is there something else going on? And that behavior then keeps them from jumping up and running out of the room. If they know that if they know they're rubbing their temple and they know that when you see that, you're going to be able to, come to them and say, okay, what's going on? Then they're not going to react a lot of times because they know that they're going to get that support. So, there's all kinds of different things. Just simple eye contact sometimes. They need that simple, what?
Mom look.
Yeah, that mom look, yeah. Exactly. And then you've got predictable transitions. Give warnings ahead of time before they're fixing to transition. Just like I said with the hallway. I'm letting her know that the hallway's coming up and here's the expectations, but she knows in just a few minutes we're going to get up and go the hallway. So that lets that student be prepared because that might be a tough area for that child. They don't want to walk on the black tile. They don't want to be quiet in the hall. They want to jabber and all that, So give them that prompt ahead of time. Circulate. Reinforce the cues. Provide quiet assistance. Praise publicly, but correct privately. Here's an example. It says, I noticed how Samuel helped organize the science materials without being asked. That shows great responsibility. What does that do for that student? That student, if I say that to that student, it makes that student feel good that they helped, and it specifically said what did that student do, so it told them. It wasn't just here, fist bump, high five, good job. I really like how you organize the science materials. But not only that, it's going to help that student, but it's going to help the student sitting around that student that hears that. Because they're going to be like, well, I want that praise too. Okay, so Ms. Ingram, can I help with something? Then that's way better having them help you with something than actually a negative behavior. So always praise publicly too, because that does help. But if you've got a correction that has to be made, do that privately. Can I speak to you? Can I, I'm going to kind of get close and we're going to have just a real quiet conversation. Or whatever, but don't correct in front of the whole class or in front of the whole school. Actively observe, identify positive behaviors to reinforce. If you see something going on in the lunchroom, with these four students, and you're seeing it, but their teacher didn't see it because their teachers are not usually down there at the lunchtime, right? Let their teacher know. Let your administration know. Let the principal know. Say, hey, there's been many times I've had students that have done things that I wanted them to do, and to praise them, we just walked into the principal's office, and I was like, I just want to tell you what the good job that this child just did, and I said specifically what the child did. It's that simple. They just want praise. They just want support and they just want praise. So, you can do that. And if it's in the lunchroom, maybe take the cooks. So it's like, okay, did you know that this kid, go to the cooks and say, this kid has done this, and I'm just so proud of them. And the cooks, they'll make over that, that student too. They just want that. The janitors, everybody they just want some praise. So by doing it, praising publicly and correcting privately, it's going to preserve the dignity. It's going to build self-esteem in those students, and it's going to keep a positive classroom culture, but you're still going to address that behavior. Consistency. Your role is vital in ensuring consistency. Work closely with your teachers. Understand what that is and what those agreed upon behavior strategies are. Make sure if there's a strategy that you all have learned or something that you want to take back, make sure you share that with your teachers, and be like, this was awesome. I really think this would work. Let's try this. Share that. Share that with the other people in your school and in your district and stuff like that. Let others know what works and what's best. Just like me walking in the hallway with my students. I've told you all that story, but I also went back and I was like in my school, and I shared that when we had a staff meeting. I was like, okay, this is what happened. They called me out on it, but at the same time, I had to be, they knew, my staff that I worked with also knew. So then it triggered something with them. They're like, well, that makes sense, so maybe we should do that. So go back and share the things, share the positives. But be consistent in everything that you do, because students will test your boundaries. You all know that. They'll test your boundaries and see if the rules really apply each time. Not just once, but each time. Be insistent, so calmly reinforce those expectations. Don't get into a power struggle. I have never seen a power struggle work for an adult. It usually works for the kids, but it does not usually work for the adults because they want to be in control. So make sure that you don't get into a power struggle. Be persistent. Look for patterns. What's working for those students? Let's keep doing what is working for that student, and share that with the other people that are working with that student or that group of students. It says research shows most interventions take 4 to 6 weeks of consistent implementation to show results. So that's where I come back to that. When you're teaching those and when those kids are learning those expectations, it's not enough to just say this is the expectation once. You have to do that over and over again until they remember it. And not even until they remember it, actually after when they remember it, because you have to keep reinforcing that, and they need that. So be persistent. Social emotional learning. You've got to reinforce those social emotional skills. Model positive behaviors. Individualized support. Assist the students with coping and calming techniques. Observe and communicate. Pay close attention to students' emotional states. Communicate those with, the other adults that you're working with. Facilitate activities. Help lead those small groups and those learning things that are going on for the social emotional. Create a safe space. I know that's not always easy, but if you can create a safe space for that student, instead of having them have a tantrum and laying in the floor, kicking and screaming, find that safe space for that student and just move them to that safe space. Or move that safe space to them, however it needs to work. Okay, so positive language matters. Be specific. The language that you use with those students, it's got to be positive. Be specific with the praise. Specifically say, I saw this and this went so well, or this was so good of you. Be specific. Focus on the things that are observable. Comment on the actions instead of the character traits. Like, oh, you done so good, fist bump. What does good mean? What did they specifically do that you felt like was good? It can't just be, it can be. You can occasionally, like I would walk down the hall and I'd be like, good job, But most of the time I would try to walk down the hall and say, good job. I love how you're walking on that black tile. Good job. I love how that it's a zero voice in the hallway. Those kind of things. You've got, do the reinforcement with that. But don't actually use the character traits, you know what I'm saying? Highlight your growth and effort. You've been practicing your paragraph writing, and now you're including strong details. I love how you started with 10 math problems, and now you're actually completing 20 math problems. Be specific, but look for that. Look for the growth and the efforts from them. Use encouraging language. I see you're ready to learn with your materials out. That's a great, if they're ready, praise them for that. This says, research shows that classrooms with a 5-to-1 ratio of positive to corrective or negative statements have fewer behavior problems and higher academic success. That is true. However, with challenging students, it could be 10 positives to 1 corrective. Their challenging students need more than what the average general student needs. So keep that in mind. You may have to say 10 times. I noticed how you helped your partner with math problems. I noticed do it in 10 different ways compared to the 1 corrective. Here's just some examples. Instead of saying stop calling out, say I'll call on the people who raise their hands quiet. Don't use that no and don't. What about you never follow directions? Okay, stop. What would be the first direction, the first step in those directions that you need to do? You need to follow. Why can't you sit still? Well, I noticed you need to move. So you can stand at your desk or behind your chair, or use a fidget and a fidget tool or a stress ball or something like that, to work. You're being disrespectful. Well, you can say in our classroom, in our school, we speak with kind words. Let's try that again. So positive language addresses problems in ways that maintain relationships and teach better choices. You all, same thing goes for you all. You're doing that. You all are using those positives and you're adding all those things in. Self-regulation tools. That's the ability to manage emotions and impulses. Students have a lot of impulses come out sometimes. You've all seen students who, they have an impulse to steal the scissors, right? But if they had come and asked me, and you teach them, if you come and ask me to use those scissors, then I'm going to let you use those scissors if it's appropriate. You don't have to take them. I'm going to allow you to use them, just like a pencil. You've seen kids steal pencils. That's something. So that's one of those things. You've got to just address that and try to help them figure out internally how to approach that. Here's some different ways and different techniques The breathing techniques, the balloon breath. Inhale slowly, exhale through your mouth. Model that for them. If you want them to do that, model that for them. Um, just like a little kid, a little preschool. I know we got a preschool instructional assistants in here. You know, you have to teach them how to blow their nose, right? You know, most of them they don't know how to blow their nose. I mean, I'm sure you all have helped students before, and you're like, blow your nose, and they go, and nothing comes out, right? And it's like, okay, so you have to model how do you blow your nose, you know. It's the same thing. You model that breathing. 5-finger breathing. They start and they go up and they breathe in. Go down, they breathe out. You know, and it's the same, you know, and they take that time. Square breathing. They inhale 4 counts, hold, exhale 4 counts, hold. Dragon breath. Inhale deeply. Exhale forcefully with sound. Visual supports, emotion charts. Some of these kids, especially the younger ones, and I know you've seen this in preschool, they don't know what emotions look like. They don't know what sad looks like. They don't know what frustrated looks like. So they have to see you actually modeling what does that look like and how do you act when you do those things, you know, those different emotions, you know, think about that. Calm down sequence cards, personal strategy cards, visual timers. Just like I was talking about the personal strategy cards, you could use the cards, and if they have a certain color laying up on their desk, then that's your cue to be like, okay, I need to assist that student. I need to see what's going on. Physical regulation tools, appropriate fidgets, stress balls, the therapy, that kind of stuff. I was in training last week, and one of the schools said that they were in a classroom and all the first grade students had a fidget spinner. That was their, you know, that was their sensory thing that they were using during that time because they could sit with a fidget spinner and do it quietly, and they knew the expectations or they wouldn't be able to use the fidget spinner, but you know, they could pull that out, and if they were listening but they were struggling to listen, then they could sit and they could spin that fidget spinner, you know. And I think that's a great idea. I mean, but there's all kinds of other things that you can do too, you know. That was just one suggestion. Movement breaks, sensory tools. Some kids have trouble with loud noises, and you know, if there's like group activities going on in the classroom, you know, that kind of stuff, put on those headphones that kind of muffles that sound for them. Cognitive strategies, positive self-talk scripts. Have them, you know, work through some of these. Problem-solving frameworks. Emotional vocabulary development, you know, let them know what is that, what are those vocabulary that goes with the emotions that are appropriate. Mindfulness activities. And then for best results, self-regulation tools should be explicitly taught. Just like all the expectations, they should be explicitly taught. Practice, regularly practiced, consistently available. Personalized strategies are often more effective too. You know, how can we do that? You know, you're going to prompt and remind. You're going to model calmness. These kids walk in here and they have probably not seen what calm looks like coming from their parents or whoever they're living with. It's always chaos going on around them. They don't know what calm is. And they don't know how to. They don't. Exactly. They do not know that because they have not seen that and they have not learned that. So if that is an issue with those students, take the time to teach them what calm actually looks like, how to feel calm. You know, the reason behind that, it's good for us. It's very healthy for us to feel calm. So make sure those students know that and know those strategies that go with that. Okay? Facilitate access. You know, make sure that they have easy access to their designated self-regulation tools, helping them find whatever they need. You know, make sure they have access to that. Observe and document, like I talked about earlier. You know, observe what's going on. Let the other people know, well, this is what I see going on. Reinforce, praise students for attempting, to use their tools or, to have these good outcomes. Acknowledge their effort. Everyday wins, celebrate progress. Make sure you're being specific. Celebrate them. Don't be negative all the time. Actually give them, that praise and and celebrate the things that they're doing good, because they're going to remember that more than you saying, no, don't do this and no, don't do that. They're going to remember you telling them, I love how you did this and the reason why, that I love what they did. Creating personalized recognition, make sure it aligns with what their interests are. I had students, I had a couple students one time a few years ago that Legos was their thing. So, at certain times during the instruction, I might have 2 or 3 minutes left, before we was moving to the next activity, and I had a little Lego box. And they only got 2 or 3 minutes, but that was what they wanted. And they knew that if their behavior was not where it should have been during that class period, they didn't get that Lego box. So, tailor their interest to what the reinforcement is for them. Concrete visual representations, sticker charts. Kids love sticker charts. I mean, even your high school kids, they love to get stickers, things like that. Build in a positive feedback for target behaviors. Recognize and celebrate, their growth. Let them know, like if you do a sticker chart, they can see what's on there and how much success they're getting. And of course, if everybody else has got more stickers than them, what do they want to do? They want more stickers too. So, they will, it's the simplest things most of the time that motivates students. Okay, so now we're going to look at your cards. So, and these don't have to be in any order. These are, like I said, these are for you to take back and use for yourself in your class, in the school. If you want to share those, the link is in the handouts folder too. I don't even know how much time I have left. Okay, good, thank you. I'm going to go around and let somebody kind of tell me a little bit about this for just a minute. Save my breath for just a minute. So let's do positive reinforcement. You want to do the first one for me?
Give a motivator reward after desired behavior. Positively reinforcing desired behaviors increases the chances that the behavior will happen again. Positive reinforcement is planned rewards are decided ahead of time. You finish the problems, you earned a 5-minute break.
So that's very easy to do, right? And there's all kinds of different ways of doing that, but the positive, the positive reinforcement. Does somebody want to talk about the visual schedules? Read it to us or talk about it. You at this table want to?
She will. Find it and I will. All right. Visual supports increase receptive understanding and support expressive communication. Visual supports can be used to help with choice making, understanding time, preparing for schedule changes, and increasing independence. Visual supports often increase student comfort, give a sense of control, and can decrease challenging behaviors. A stop sign and picture of teacher on the snack cabinet indicates students should not open without teacher. A picture of a clock with the time and picture of playground indicates when recess will happen.
Okay. Very simple, right? Very simple. Do I have somebody that wants to read the consistent routines? Anybody in the back? You want to read it for us? No? You want to read it? Okay.
Consistent routines can be paired with visual schedules to support students who struggle with change, transitions, or lack of control. Reading block always consists of the same 4 activities, taught and aware. Any change to that routine is previewed in a visual schedule.
Okay. Very good. All right. Did we already do that one? Am I? Oh, okay. Which one did we not do? This bottom one? Did we do consistent routines? I'm lost already. Okay, what about this pre-correction? How about somebody back here in the corner? Somebody at one of the tables back here. Pre-correction, positive language. Anybody who wants to read it for me? Okay, do it.
Recorrection focuses on times when problem behavior might occur. You pre-correct by stating in positive language what you expect to occur. No reference to negatives. No, don't, stop, no. Things like that.
Okay, good. I'm just going to go quickly through the rest of these, but I want you all to know that you can take these back, and if you need a quick strategy, just flip your cards, and use these as help for you, as just reminders. Reminders of, oh yeah, I can do that. So self-monitoring, student records the targeted behavior and compares the data to the expected standards. Best to focus on behaviors you want to increase. Visual timers, countdowns, break cards, pause cards. There's a lot of times that I need a break card and a pause card. There's times at home I'm like, okay, I'm going to the porch. Don't bother me for 10 minutes, because I need a break. My brain needs a break. I just need a break, So we all need those too. So the students need those. Your mystery motivator. I like this one. When you can have a mystery and they have to pick an envelope to get what is their motivator that goes with that. Or a spinner or something like that. I like that because that keeps them on their toes because they don't know what they're getting, and it could, so I like that one. Modify the room, change the layout, move students, just like that common space. They need that common space to go to or bring to them, however. What? Oh, so visual supports. Did she get a ring? She may need you. Oh, okay. Visual supports increase the receptive understanding and support, express communication. This is their way of communicating. So they may need those visuals. Increase your opportunities to respond. That's just the number of times that you respond to the students, as they need it. Behavior contract. Those are just developed and reviewed often, and that way the parent and, the staff that's working with those students knows what's going on. Transition reminders. Give cues. Positive praise. Again, it says 3-to-1, but really with challenging behaviors, it's more like 10-to-1. Positive pairing. Pair students together who work good together. Do the first then contingencies. The highly preferred activity after, they've completed whatever the other task is. Calm follow through. Stay calm. Consistent in your expectations. High probability task or behavior momentum. Provide students with easy tasks before you give them the difficult tasks. Offer choices. Do they have to always complete their assignments pencil paper? With technology the way it is now, there's other ways of getting, as long as you're getting what you want from that student, it does not have to be straight paper pencil. Figure out what's easiest for that student and, offer those choices. Would you rather use the computer to complete the assignment or piece of paper and pencil or ink pen or whatever? I had a student one time that he had a sensory issue and he did not like the sound of pencils. The way that a pencil sounds It really couldn't, yeah, he couldn't do it. So what I did was I bought him specifically those ink pens that have the erasers on top, so the erasable ink pen. Does the same job as a pencil. He didn't mind that sound, you know, but he could not, the sensory thing with the pencil sound was not good for him. Prompting, cueing, check in, check out. Check in, check out. You check in with the student in the morning and they have their day. Sometimes you check in with them at lunchtime, and then you check in again at the end of the day, and you discuss how the days went. What's positive from the day? Are there needs from that student? Discuss that. Does that have to be the assistant that's working with that student? No. I had a student one time, and he had a connection with the janitor. He was a 5th grade boy, and him and the janitor just had, he's just a country boy, and, they had a good conversation. So that was, we figured out that if he checked in with that janitor, in the morning and then again before the end of the day, it made that child's day better, and his behaviors were so much better, so it doesn't have to be, the teacher or the assistant that's in the room. It can be other people in the building. It needs to be consistent, but it can be other people. A direct behavior rating, feedback, daily target, like a chart. Calm down, peace corner, task choices, choice board, offer choices. The good behavior game. You can do that. There's all kinds of different activities and things that you can do. The you and me game. The you and me game, I like this because the student competes with the adult to earn the points. And points are earned when teacher catches them doing expectations. Well, if the teacher catches them on a non-example or something they shouldn't, then the teacher gets the points. So it's like a competition. Who's going to get more points for this time frame? So I like that. And then there's 2 extra cards there that you all can add strategies for. Any questions? Any questions? Anything for that? Okay, so here's my contact information. Again, it's going to be in that folder. Reach out, and then if you don't care, just take just a minute and do this feedback for me. I would appreciate it. It is a bit.ly, and it'll come up at the bottom and it'll say continue to the site.